Ya funciona.
Ya está trabajando. A ver. Hola. Hola. Hello.
Hola.
Hello,
No.
please
Hello.
remember to mute your telephones before we start. Thank you.
Es como una sala. ¿Puedo con este? ¿Puedo con este o cómo?
Espérate, a ver si vienes aquí. Ponte eso en esa ventana.
Hola.
Hola. Hello.
The conference has been muted.
Hello, thank you for joining the Cambridge English Advanced webinar. Please remember to mute your telephones during the webinar. You have to turn off the volume of your telephone, and the chat will be disabled during the webinar, but we'll enable it after the webinar so that you can ask your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernie Maguire, and I'm going to be your teacher for this webinar. During this webinar, what I'm going to be doing is to give you what we call hints and tips. What are hints and tips? Hints and tips are small pieces of advice which will hopefully help you get the most out of your exam experience. Obviously, this being a short session of an hour and a half is not going to make much of a difference for English. It won't make any difference to your English, but what I hope it will do is to give you some little pieces of advice that will help you in practical terms, both in terms of how to approach the exam and in terms of how to deal with little things that you might find difficult in the different tasks. Now, the first thing I'd like to tell you, and the first thing I'd like to advise you about, and you should take this piece of advice very seriously, and that is to try and get a good night's sleep the night before. It's very important to be rested when you're doing an exam, and this is quite a long exam, and it's quite demanding and quite exacting. So that's important. Try and get a good night's sleep. Also, make sure that you arrive at the venue in plenty of time, and make sure you know how to get there. You know which bus you have to catch, which metro you have to catch. There's nothing worse than getting to an exam in a rush. And don't forget to take all the things you need. Your exam centre will give you instructions about what you can take. Authorised objects are medication if you need it, a bottle of water, pencil case with pen, pencil, rubber and ruler for use during the exam. It's important to remember that you will not be allowed to have your mobile phone with you during the exam. In fact, all electronic devices are forbidden, and if you have them on your person, you'll be required to hand them in until the very end of the test. Okay, you may think this is a strange piece of advice, what I'm going to give you now, but I think it's very important. You should avoid last-minute study with your textbook, last-minute looking at lists of phrasal verbs or irregular paths or anything like that. Don't study English the night before the exam. You're not going to learn anything, and you're not going to be just on the chance that you might pick up the odd word. It's not about that. You're examining, your English is examined at a fairly high level. It's not going to make any difference what you do the night before in terms of study. However, if you want to watch a film or television in English the night before the exam, that's different. That's a good thing to do. It will help activate your English and sort of get you in the mood to do the exam the next day. Another really good thing to do, I always advise my students to do this, and that is to talk in English to friends before you start. This will activate your English and put you in the right mood to do the exam. And if you haven't got a friend near to speak English to on the day of the exam, just talk to yourself. People might think you're mad, but at least you'll be activating your English. Okay, so they are general hints and tips before you even start doing the exam. So what we're going to do now is go through the exams, go through the different papers, looking at the different tasks. Some tasks I'll be giving you more hints than others because some of them are easier to give hints about. So we'll go through the papers, we'll go through reading, writing, listening, and we'll do speaking at the end. And we'll stop at particular points of the exam and we'll look at particular aspects of the exam. We'll start off with reading and use of English. Reading and use of English now are tested together. And this is fairly recent, that I think this started in 2015. Reading and use of English are actually quite similar in a way, so it makes sense that these two papers should be put together because it makes the exam that little bit shorter. You have an hour and 30 minutes, so it's a pretty long exam. Reading and use of English are similar in a way. Use of English is the grammar and vocabulary that you need to be able to perform in English, to read, write, speak and listen. And reading is the sort of skill expression of that knowledge. You wouldn't be able to read anything, you wouldn't be able to do anything without some grammar and vocabulary. So these two papers have been put together. I mean, it's probably much more practical to do it this way rather than separate out the use of English. Also, advanced grammar is a complicated business, and in a way, the knowledge of the grammar itself doesn't particularly necessarily help you in all aspects of your communication. So we can see by Cambridge putting these two papers together that actually there's a little bit more emphasis on the skill of using your English rather than your knowledge of how English works. So let's have a look at this paper and see which parts correspond to knowledge and which parts correspond to the skill. As you can see from the slides you have on your screens, reading and use of English is the first 4 parts of reading and use of English actually contemplate use of English. So that's in a slightly different order to the title of the paper. So we have, as I said before, these 4 parts which contemplate grammar will be about the grammar points and about vocabulary. So you'll be tested on your use of grammar and vocabulary. Part 1 more specifically on vocabulary, the rest on grammar and vocabulary. As I said, again, it's quite difficult to separate out grammar from vocabulary because you can't do one without the other anyway. So parts 1 to 4 are on use of English. Parts 5 to 8 contemplate reading. That means your understanding and comprehension of a different text. And not only of the content of those texts, but also they contemplate a little bit how texts work, what the structure of a particular text is. So we're going to go through these parts from 1 to 8, one by one, so that I can give you the hints and tips, which I think may be useful to you. So let's have a look now at parts 1 and 2. Parts 1 and 2 are gap fills. What does gap fill mean? It means there's a space which you have to fill correctly, which you have to decide which word best fits the gap in question. It's a good idea to read through the text in both of these cases so that you can activate that vocabulary that will probably help you answer the questions. The first text, part 1, is about gadgets. Well, gadgets is a very modern subject. We're surrounded by gadgets. So, if you know that the text is about gadgets, then you will have some kind of an idea about what's going to come up. Part 1 is actually a sort of a kind of vocabulary test, really, since you have to choose the correct noun, verb, adjective, or whatever it is that's there available to you. You have to make sure the word that you use fits the whole sentence, not just the first part of the sentence. And you have to make sure the sentence makes sense, obviously. It's quite possible that you might not be entirely sure of the answer. So in this case, a good thing to do is to try and eliminate the one or the ones that you know are not correct, and then try the remaining words out in your head. And if you really don't know, then the best thing to do is guess. Or if you prefer to come back to it, come back to it, but don't forget it. Okay, it's important not to forget to go back. Let's have a look at this one. So we have the smartphone question. For tomorrow's gadgets will inevitably be even smarter. According to experts, soon they will have emotional intelligence. Now, it's always good to underline an important word, and I think probably emotional intelligence is one of the important words in this particular case. They will be able to blank how we feel and react to our mood by joining in our happiness or leaving us alone when we are angry. Okay, now, if a gadget has emotional intelligence and can join in our happiness, what word do you think goes there? I would say perceive, because perceive means to recognize, to understand, to sort of feel something. If you perceive something, you see it in a very intimate way. Now, if that's not very clear to you at the beginning, then if you go through the other words and you can see reasons why those words wouldn't be correct, I think you'll find that the reasons are quite clear there. If we look at part 2, which contemplates use of English, you need here to find a word, but this time you need to find it out of your own head, to fill each space in a short text. You have to write very clearly when you write these words, and you have to make sure that the word you use fits the whole sentence. Have a look at this example. This is a good example, I think, because it's not obvious. Let's have a look at the little paragraph that we've got there on the screen in part 2. It's about the post-it note. You know, those little yellow notes that we all use for everything. Okay. It has been described as the solution to a problem nobody knew existed. But that hasn't stopped the self-attaching post-it notes, that little square piece of paper that sticks in a clever way that it can be removed, leaving no damage, blank becoming an essential piece of stationery worldwide. This is a long sentence, and it's a bit of a complicated one. Have a look and see, look at the main sentence, which will start from the beginning. We'll start from the beginning, and we're going to leave out the sentence in between the hyphens. So, it has been described as a solution to a problem nobody knew existed. But that hasn't stopped the self-attaching post-it note. Then we have a blank in 10, blank becoming an essential piece of stationery worldwide. So, stopped the self-attaching post-it note, look at number 10, from becoming an essential piece of stationery worldwide. That's a bit tricky. So you have to be careful that you keep your eye on how that paragraph is functioning in this case. Now, if you look at the sentence in the middle, between the hyphens, beginning that little square piece of paper. So here we have, and finishing with leaving no damage. That little square piece of paper that sticks in such a clever way that it can be removed, leaving no damage. Okay, so you can see you have to keep your eye on these two questions, but at the level of sentence. What it's testing here is your grammatical control of a text at the level of the phrase and the sentence, okay? So I'm going to read it again, just so that you can see how these two rather tricky little questions work. So here we go. It has been described as the solution to a problem nobody knew existed, but that hasn't stopped the self-attaching post-it note, that little square piece of paper that sticks in such a clever way that it can be removed, leaving no damage, from becoming an essential piece of stationery. So you see, hasn't stopped the post-it note from becoming. Bit tricky, eh? So keep your eye on the punctuation, keep your eye on how those sentences work and the phrases that you have embedded in the sentences. Okay? That's a bit of a difficult one, but I thought I'd show you that because it does indicate how important it is to be systematic when you're looking at this kind of a task. Okay, so there we have the gap fills. Part 1, a multiple choice gap fill. You have to discount what you know isn't correct, put in what you think is correct, and then try it out in your head. Part 2 is quite a systematic exercise. You need to make sure that the sentence or sentences make sense once you have put the words in. The words, where do they come from? Out of your head. Okay? So we're going to go on to part 3. We're going to go, this is word formation. This is part 3, sentence transformation. I'm looking at on a separate slide. So this particular slide only contemplates word formation. I think word formation actually is quite a nice exercise, and I don't think it's particularly difficult. You just need to make sure you have the right part of speech in there. And this is a particular thing you have to pay attention to. Is it a verb? Is it a noun? Is it an adjective? Is it negative or is it plural? The word that you're given always needs to be changed. It is never the word that you're given that you have to put in the blank. It always needs changing. So again, it's a good idea to read through the text so that you know what it's about. And in this case, it's about the benefits of being multilingual. Okay, so first of all, you'd read through the text. You'd read through it quite quickly because you actually don't have time to dwell too much on these texts. In the case of word formation, you just need to sort of activate your vocabulary. And activating your vocabulary is something which happens subconsciously. It's not something that you're going to be particularly aware of, but it's something that happens in our own language. When we start reading a text about whatever subject it is, we start activating the vocabulary that we associate with that subject. The same thing happens in second language as well. So let's have a look. The benefits of being multilingual, something a lot of you know about, or at least about being bilingual because you have your own language plus English at a fairly good level as well. So let's have a look at the text. Speaking 2 or more languages well has been shown to be highly beneficial in a number of ways, some quite surprising. First of all, learning a second language makes you focus on the mechanics of language and increases your blank of your first language. There, your word is aware. So it seems to me quite clear that what you have to do there is to find a noun which you can make from the word aware, which is a verb. Sorry, aware is an adjective. So you need to find the noun corresponding to this word. All right? And you're probably all thinking, yes, I know it already. So there we have awareness of your first language. Let's continue with the second example you have on your screens. Secondly, your memory improves. Learning a second language involves memorizing rules and vocabulary. Well, we know all about this, don't we? Which researchers say helps strengthen your mental muscle. Blank, this explains why multilingual people are better at remembering lists of sequences. Here, what will help you is the position of the blank in this particular case. The verb from which you are to construct your word, as it were, is there on the right with appear. Now, it's quite likely to be which part of speech? It's quite likely if it's at the beginning in this way that it will be an adverb. So the adverb which derives from the verb appear is, of course, apparently. Okay? So, summing up, you must look for which part of speech we're looking for. Is it a verb? Is it a noun? Is it an adjective? Is it negative? Is it plural? Can you add a suffix? Can you add a prefix? Because these word families are quite large and they have different variations just as they do in your own first language, in Spanish. So that's word formation, which, as I say, I think is probably quite a nice exercise. And quite systematic again. Okay, let's move on to sentence transformations. Sentence transformations. Okay, this is part 4. It's what we call keyword translations, because you have a keyword there which you have to use to complete another version of the sentence with as similar a meaning as possible. Let's have a look at the examples. An important thing to remember here in this particular part is to read the instructions. In fact, this is a very important hint for this paper and for all the papers. You must be careful to read the instructions. I'm going to read them to you now. So have a look at that. And the instructions are: complete the second sentence so that it has a similar meaning to the first sentence using the word given. Do not change the word given, okay? That word has to remain the same. And also, very importantly, you must use between 3 and 6 words, including the word given. Not 7, not 2, between 3 and 6. So here, you can see that this has already been done for you. We've decided not to change our plans even though there is a strong possibility of rain, okay? The key word, which is remains the same in the example. Let's have a look at 26 now. Can you summarize for me what took place at the meeting? So we know that we can't change the key word, which is give, and we know we must use between 3 and 6 words, including the word given. So the answer to that one is, can you give me a summary of what took place at the meeting? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. So 5 is between 3 and 6, so we're doing okay there. All right. Now, let's move on. Let's move on to part 5. Now, of course, we finished with the grammar part. We finished with the use of English and the vocabulary part. So now we're moving on to the reading proper. It's about reading. As I said to you right at the beginning, this part of the paper is between 5 and 8. It's about reading and understanding. It's about reading and understanding the meaning of the text, sometimes the general meaning, sometimes the very specific meaning, and it's also about understanding the structure of a text. And we're going to have a look at this now. In part 5, it's a multiple choice reading comprehension section. You must choose the correct answer out of 4 possible answers. This is a fairly simple format. What you need to do is identify which sentence is correct. Which of the affirmations, one of the sentences, A, B, C, or D is correct. We're not going to go through this. Because it will take us too long. And actually, this is a fairly simple type of activity, type of task. Important though, read through to get a sense. So read through quite quickly to get a sense of what's going on. And in fact, this is fairly straightforward, and I'll tell you why. The reason it's fairly straightforward is that the questions follow the same order as the text. Well, actually, this happens a lot during an exam. It wouldn't be fair, would it, to find the answers all over the place. Although with matching, that happens a little bit. But we'll look at that in a minute, so don't worry about that. So the format is fairly simple. Don't spend time on words that you don't understand. Maybe, there's a word that comes up there that that you don't know, that you don't recognize. But don't worry about it, because the most likely scenario is that you won't need to understand it. The thing about reading and understanding a text is you don't necessarily need to understand absolutely every word in it. And this happens in our own language as well. You only need to understand enough to be able to answer the questions you're being asked on it. When you're at university and you're using a text, you only need to get a particular message, a general message, and you only need to understand the important points. And those points may vary depending on the teacher and depending on what you're doing, but it's never necessary to understand every single word in the text. So you should relax a little bit about that. And what you shouldn't relax about, though, is checking that the answer you choose is supported by evidence from the text, not supported by evidence from your head. The answers to all the reading questions are in the text. They're nowhere else, okay? So you'll not be required to interpret or anything like that. You'll be required to find that evidence, to find the answer in the text, which is in black and white in front of your eyes, okay? Good idea to underline important parts, to underline what you consider to be a main point. That kind of thing is always a good idea. And of course, it's always a good idea to write clearly, because the examiners are going to need to be able to read and understand your writing. Okay, so multiple choice, that's done. Now it gets a little bit more complicated from now on. So that's part 5. We're going to move on to part 6. Matching. Okay, this is what we call cross-text multiple matching. That sounds extremely complicated, but in fact, it isn't. It isn't. What you're presented with here is you're presented with a short list of opinions and attitudes which you have to match with paragraphs, okay? So there you can see it on your screens. You have 4 texts containing opinions and attitudes of 4 experts. And then you have 4 descriptions of the content of those texts, okay? So you need to read through the 4 texts, and then you need to read through the 4 descriptions of the content of those texts and put them together, okay? So here, for this particular task, what I'm going to give you are hints which are extremely general hints for reading. No doubt you've seen this type of task in your preparation for the exam. But again, it's the same kind of advice. You read through the text, then read through them more carefully, highlight or underline important words in the questions and important words in the text, and always find reasons to support your decisions. Okay. So there we are. That's part 6, cross-text multiple matching. This is not necessarily about the structure of the text. What it's examining is the content of the text, that you have understood, you have correctly understood the point of view of those texts, okay? The opinions, attitudes of those 4 experts. Okay, we're going to move on now to part 7. This one is specifically test your understanding of structure. Again, because it's multiple matching, it's a little more tricky. more than tricky, it just requires you to keep going backwards and forwards between one part and another. The description of this reading exercise is that you read, like, for example, an extract from a magazine article, let's say, from which 6 paragraphs have been removed, okay? And your job is to choose the correct paragraph and move it back into its gap where it should be. The problem being that there's one extra paragraph. So it's a bit strange, really, because it isn't normal that paragraphs should be removed from a text. But what this particular task is examining is your ability to understand how texts are organized. So think about it. A text from which paragraphs have been taken out, and you just have to put them all back in again. It's a little bit like a jigsaw, putting the paragraphs back into their place, so that you're putting the text back together again. The complication being, of course, that there is an extra paragraph which doesn't fit. Again, keep calm, keep going backwards and forwards, checking and checking. You'll find yourself, going backwards and forwards between the text and between the removed paragraph. But don't worry, just keep going backwards and forwards and checking and checking. A good approach to this is, as you can see on your screens, read through the gap text again to activate your ideas. Note the ideas before and after the gap. You particularly notice where the gap is, and there'll be some clues before the gap and after the gap with regard to what's missing. Then you read through the paragraph. As you're reading through the paragraph, you'll be thinking, oh, I think I know where this goes. Go back, check. Underline important and relevant information in both parts, in the text itself and in the removed paragraph. And you might find that the information in the text and the information in the removed paragraph, you see there's some similarity between them, so that can be a clue as to where that missing paragraph goes. Again, always, evidence, evidence, evidence. All right, there has to be a reason why you're putting your paragraph back into the text. Why are you putting it there? Find a reason. Convince yourself. If you can convince yourself, that's the first step towards convincing the examiner, I think. And make sure that the extra paragraph doesn't fit. So check that out, the extra paragraph. And then reread the whole text when you've placed all the paragraphs. Then when you reread the text, it will flow. If when you reread the text you find that something sticks out of it, that sounds rather strange, it doesn't flow properly, then check out that particular answer. Okay? So this more than difficult, it's kind of tricky, as it were. It's tricky because you have to make sure that the paragraphs that have been taken out have been put back in the proper place, and the jigsaw must fit together nicely. Okay, now we move on to part 8. Okay, this is kind of a nice exercise. I think it's nice, and the reason that it's nice is because it's a bit different, and you have to read for specific information, detail, opinion, and attitude. So you have to get right down to those words. What does it consist of? It consists of a set of 10 questions and then some paragraphs. I'm going to look at an example that I've got in front of me. In this example, there's an article about 5 managers' advice about asking for a pay rise. So imagine we have 5 managers giving their opinion about how best you might ask for a pay rise and how to get good results. So you have manager 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with those opinions. All right? Then you have a series of sentences, okay, which will help you, with which you have to identify manager 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right? So in this particular case, we have the 5 paragraphs describing, giving me advice about how to ask for a pay rise successfully, and then you have these sentences which you have to match with the manager in question. So let's say, for example, let me give you an example of this. You should take the company's current financial situation into account before making your request. That's one of the questions, okay? Which manager, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, is the one that says, take the company's current financial situation into account? Which means you have to read those texts of the manager's advice quite carefully, okay? Because it's reading for specific information and detail. Here I have some hints which I'd like to give to you when you're approaching this particular text. So there you have the set of 10 questions and some continuous text. Read the questions first and note the wording. Again, always underlining important words. Skim through the text for general understanding, so you have a quick look. And then you highlight or underline important words in the questions. Why do you do that? Because that is what you're going to be looking for in the text. So if you highlight or underline the important words in the questions, you know what you're going to be looking for, okay? So in the case of the example that I gave you about take the company's current financial situation into account, there you would underline company's current financial situation, and that is what you're looking for in the text. Where did that come? Who said that? And when you find that, there's your answer, okay? So you link the questions to areas or sections, like I've just said, before reading closely. So, you know, it's like whenever you approach a text, first of all, you get a general view, and then you assimilate by underlining in the questions the information that you're looking for in the text, okay? So you get into the text little by little, going more and more deeply. Okay, important to know is that the questions come in the same order as the answers in the text, in the multiple choice part of the paper. Okay, that applies, this last hint, okay, that doesn't actually apply to this part, or to this task. The questions in this just applies to, I just need to clarify this, when you have multiple choice questions before a text or after a text, the order is the same as the multiple choice, but in this part 8, what you're doing is matching, so it doesn't actually come in the same order, because you're matching the questions with the text, and that could cross over very easily, okay? So that, the last point, only applies to multiple choice. I must get rid of that. If you need me to clarify that further, please write to me. I'm going to give you my email address at the end of the session, and please feel free to ask me about any of this, but more specifically about that. Okay, now we're going to move on to reading, which is general advice on reading, which is the kind of advice you give to anyone who is reading any text and doing any reading exam. Look carefully at titles, look carefully at examples and images. You sometimes get a picture, so look at it, it's there for a reason. Don't write 2 possible answers, and don't leave blanks. Find evidence, and for reasons always, clear handwriting, check your spelling, fill in your answer sheet during exam time, and take care to fill it in correctly, okay? So no mistakes when you're transferring your answers to the answer sheet, all right? And make sure your handwriting is clear. Writing. The writing paper is the one I particularly wanted to stress certain aspects of. You get an hour and a half to write two compositions, as it were, 2 pieces of writing. One of them is compulsory, and the other one you have a choice. Now, what I've done here is I wanted to particularly emphasize the importance of the writing paper at this level. Remember, it's a chance to show the examiner what you know. Okay, so use the chance to show the level of language that you have, Remember, C1 is an advanced level. If you attempt more complex language, even if it's not entirely correct, this will be positively valued by the examiner. Okay, so we're going to look here now at, we'll come back to these two parts separately, but let's have a look at what the Common European Framework Level C1 says about this level of writing. And this is what you should be aiming for in your exam. I can express myself in a clear, well-structured text, expressing points of view at some length, okay? Those of you who've done first certificate, we are talking about a level beyond, okay? It's at some length. You express points of view at some length. This is why the writing paper, the tasks, the two different tasks are longer. Also, it says I can write about complex subjects in a letter, an essay, or a report, underlining what I consider to be the salient issues. Obviously not underlining literally, but emphasizing what you consider to be important issues, the most important issues, okay, the key issues, the most obvious issues, all right? So you know how to express that in your writing. And you can select style appropriate to the reader in mind. Now, it's much simpler, you know. It's whether you're writing an informal register in a letter to a friend or something along those lines, or whether you're writing something more formal in which you have to express yourself in a different way. At advanced level, you should be able to do that. So let's have a look now at the compulsory essay. I hope you can see that. Again, in the writing paper, it's really important to read the instructions. It's really important to answer the question. I can't stress this enough. I can't stress this enough because it won't do if you don't answer the question. You have to do what the instructions tell you to do. So let's have a look at this one by way of an example. So it's 220, 260 words in an appropriate style. As you can see, that contemplates the C1 level at writing in an appropriate style. Your class has watched the television documentary on the impact of global tourism. You've made the notes below. Okay, so what the words on the page here that you have to look at are placing you in context, and they're telling you what you must do. So these are the notes that you have to imagine you've made. Areas affected by global tourism, the environment, local economies, and international understanding. And there are also, as you can see, some opinions expressed in the documentary are increased travel can have major effects on wildlife and nature, the survival of local economies depends on tourism, and travel helps us understand others better. Your task is to write an essay discussing 2 of the areas affected in your notes, not 3, 2 of the areas. You should explain which area has been more affected by global tourism, giving reasons in support of your answer, okay? So that's quite a lot of information to absorb before you even start writing. So it's a good idea to spend some time on that, reading that through, making sure that you know what it is you're supposed to be doing. You may, if you wish, I continue reading there at the bottom, you may, if you wish, make use of the opinions expressed in the documentary, but you should use your own words as far as possible. Okay, so here you are given a lot of material with which to write your composition, your essay. So before you put pen to paper, read that and read it over and over. And only when you have got the idea of what you're supposed to be doing should you put pen to paper. And you should put pen to paper to plan. Planning will help you think through how you're going to organize your composition, okay? It's worth planning because it saves time in the end. It's much better to plan than it is to write out twice what it is your composition. If you write something out twice, it takes a long time and it wastes time that you could be using by planning. I'm sure your teachers have already told you about this, and it's something you should keep in mind. Okay, and only when you know what you want to say should you start writing your composition. So this task tends to be a follow-up to an academic activity. So your context is maybe at university, and you are expected to write this as a follow-up to some previous activity. Make sure you take time, as I said, to read all instructions. Stick to the question and include all the points that you have to include. This is probably the one most important piece of advice I can give you. Okay? The number of words you have to write, 220 to 260, it's a good idea to see what that looks like so that you don't have to waste time counting the words. Okay? So that is more or less the hints and tips I can give you about this particular part. Make sure the essays are organized. This has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It must be easy to read for the reader. Make sure that your ideas flow on. Don't repeat yourself too much. Make your writing legible. It can be in capitals or lowercase, as long as it's easy to read. Remember, the examiner is a human being. It might be an idea, actually, to write on every second line so that you'll have room to make corrections without making a mess, as your writing really does need to be legible. Okay, we're going to move on now to part 2. You have a choice in part 2, a choice of 3 options. It's in a way, I guess that part 2 is sort of easier because it does give you a much more freedom in terms of what you can write. Obviously, you have to read through the context, but you won't be spending as long on reading this context as you would for the first part. So it just gives you a scenario, really. The place where you work has opened an office. This I've chosen, actually. I've chosen this one from you have 3 options which can be an essay, which can be a letter, an email, an essay, a proposal, a report, or a review. This particular one is a proposal. So the place where you work has opened an office in another country, and a group from that office is coming for a 3-day visit to your workplace to learn more about the business. Your manager's asked you to write a proposal outlining training activities you think would be useful. So here, and as well as social events. So here you can actually express your own ideas quite freely. Okay, what would you do? What kind of a proposal would you put forward for this? Again, it's the same length as the previous one, so it's a good thing to use the same amount of time as you would in the first one. And as I say, you do have options. You do have options, which means that you can either think about it maybe in 2 ways. Perhaps you like the subject matter, you like the idea of writing something for work, or perhaps you like the type of writing. Perhaps you're good at writing proposals, you like writing proposals. Perhaps you're good at writing something else, maybe reports or reviews. Maybe you like going to the cinema and you like writing reviews. So think about what you personally would prefer in terms of the type of question you attempt. But also think if you see something which you like, a theme that you like music or cinema or anything like that, and you feel that you would find it easy to write about that, also keep that in mind. It's always easier to write and speak, in fact, about things that we're particularly personally interested in. As I said, when I showed you the Common European Framework, I'm going to go back to it, actually. So let's have a little look at level C1 from the Common European Framework. Clear, well-structured points of view, complex subjects, essay reports, underlining what I consider to be salient, okay? Keep that in mind. You're aiming quite high. Let's have a look at this. Now we're going to look at what the examiner is looking for. How is the examiner going to look at your writing? What are they going to be looking for? They're going to be looking for content. Have you fulfilled the task? Have you answered the question? Have you done what you're supposed to do, what you were asked to do? Then communicative achievement. How appropriate is the language? Is your register right? Then your organisation, is the writing logical and ordered? Is it in good paragraph? Is it structured well in terms of paragraph? Does it have a beginning, a middle? Do you conclude nicely? Not repeating yourself, okay? It's very tempting to repeat yourself if you feel very passionate about a particular idea, to say it in a different way. Try and avoid that. Try and keep that aspect of your writing fairly simple in terms of organisation, not language, in terms of organisation. And then the language, vocabulary and grammar. Is the range of language varied enough? Is it accurate? Does it communicate well? Okay, here I'd like to make a point which I consider to be important. You're at level C1. You need to try and use that advanced language that you have been learning this year. And that language which distinguishes C1 from B2. That language which distinguishes advanced from first certificate. You will have much more vocabulary at this level than you had when you did first certificate, if indeed you did it. So use that vocabulary. Don't repeat a word. Try and find another way of saying something. So that's a piece of advice I would give you there. Just a couple more things I'd like to say. Make sure your writing is legible. Okay, I think that's... Oh, no, very importantly, be careful with small mistakes. Check over your work, check over your writing for little mistakes. And the typical mistakes, you probably already know what your typical mistakes are. There could be anything from forgetting to add S on he, she, it. So sometimes a very common thing people do, it's a slip really. You say something like she get instead of she gets. And that's a very basic, simple mistake. It's very easy to make. Spelling mistakes, like if you're writing the word lighting, sometimes people write two T's, that kind of thing. Look out for that, because if you can eliminate those little mistakes, the impression of your writing is so much better. Okay? If you do make mistakes in spelling and grammar, they should be advanced mistakes, not simple little mistakes that you should have eradicated by B2 level. Okay? Now, it's advanced, it's C1, you need to eliminate all those little mistakes. Let's try and eliminate them as much as you possibly can. Okay, now, we're going to have a look at general advice for writing. I think I've mentioned all these. Answer the question, don't invent a question you prefer, none of that. Underline important points when you're looking at the notes you're given. Plan, organize, vary your language. Be careful with spelling. A word about a number of words. Don't make the text too long and don't make them too short. You have the 220 to 260. That's there for a reason, to help you produce the text that the examiners are looking for. Obviously, if you go over 10, 20, 30 words, that isn't a problem. It's better to go over probably than to go under, but you won't have time to go over much. So don't think that the more you write, the better. No, no, no. That length of composition is required for a reason. Okay, so I hope that is helpful. I'm going to say you need to write your answers clearly and in the booklet, but just you can be... you don't need to worry about having rough paper. You have plenty of paper to write your notes on and practice your spelling and all that kind of thing. Okay, so if you need any rough paper, raise your hand and ask the examiner. Now let's move on to listening. Listening is nothing special. I say it's nothing special in the tasks that you're required to do in the listening paper are nothing probably that you haven't already done in class. And therefore, it's fairly simple. It's listening and understanding. Parts 1 to 4, multiple choice, sentence completion, multiple matching, multiple choice. The text, the spoken text I've taken from They're either monologues or interacting speakers, so monologues or conversational. They're taken from those subjects you can see on your screens, which means that they're perfectly general. There's nothing special, nothing specialized, nothing technical, nothing academic as such, although you will get, it's totally possible that you could get a lecture, but it will be absolutely general. It will not be specialized in any way. Okay, this is where something that I would like to insist on. Listening is one of those things that's quite difficult to do if you're nervous. So it's a good idea to try and relax. Now you probably will be quite relaxed actually, because you've already done your reading and use of English, you've already done your writing, so you're quite used to using English. But it is difficult to understand things if you're nervous. So if you are nervous, some people do get a bit nervous with listening. Just try and breathe in and out slowly and think of something like the sea or a green field or whatever makes you feel relaxed. Listen to all the instructions and use the time you have, which you have a lot, usefully, both before and after the tasks. You're given time to read through the questions. Make sure you do that, and that you don't look out of the window or spend your time panicking. That's not a good idea. So read the questions carefully before you hear each part and underline keywords. It's very similar to what you would do in other exams, in other papers, in reading and all this sort of thing. It'll help you get an idea of the context as well as the information you're being asked for. You may even have time to imagine what the answers might be, so you'll know what to listen for. That's probably quite a difficult thing to guess the answer before you've heard the text. But you know what I mean. You know what you're listening for, what sort of thing you're listening for, so that when you hear a word perhaps related to an address, let's say, you will be ready to go with that information, to listen for that information. The listening part 1, you hear 3 different extracts. For questions 1 to 6, choose the answer which best fits. You overhear 2 friends discussing a new film in this particular case. And it's based on a novel, and so these people are the friends, they're talking about the film, and they're obviously going to express their opinion. So if you read this beforehand, you're going to be thinking film, they'll be talking about what they think about it, and look, is it original? Is the audience familiar? If you look down those questions, is it to do with a director? So you know kind of what you're looking out for, all right? And then you know to listen out for when they come to discuss the star of the film. The woman, then you need to listen carefully at what the opinion that the woman expresses and the opinion that the man expresses, and how those 2 opinions are related to each other. Okay, so nothing particularly complicated, I always think, about the listening. So there we have part 1, but let's move on to part 2, which I think is quite a nice thing to do. This is part 2 is usually an informational monologue of about 3 minutes. So the 8 questions that you have in this part, usually the form, well, always the form they take, is of incomplete sentences which you're required to complete. Okay, so you need to listen to the text and complete the sentences. And usually what they're looking for are single words or very short noun groups. The answers are the actual words heard on the recording, and you don't need to change them in any way. So be careful to write clearly when you copy them onto the answer sheet using capital letters, which will probably help the examiner with regard to clarity of your writing. Okay, I think this is quite a fun part, and because you actually have to find the exact words. Again, if you read before, go through the sentences before. If you look at number 7 there on your screen, it's about sea turtles. So Jane mentions that something is common to all species of turtle except one. There it says fun, but it should say one. So sorry about that. except one. Okay, so there we think we're probably looking for a noun, okay, or maybe a gerund. So if you know beforehand what you're listening out for, that will help you. So the text just continues. I put etc. at the bottom, obviously. I'm only putting little excerpts and little extracts from the text here, just to give you an example of probably what you already know, because you've probably seen this 100 times. Okay, so that's listening part 2. Okay, part 3 we're going to move on to now, which is the longest part of the listening test. Okay, this is an interview, let's say, in which 2 young entrepreneurs who sell different products are talking about their work. So now you have to get into this conversation that the 2 are having. And again, preparation for this with regard to what you're listening out for will help you. And obviously when you listen to the text the second time, you will use that time to check out what your answers are and to make sure that you've got the right answers, okay? So here in your multiple choice you have, you're listening out for, maybe she's going to talk about unconventional concepts or risk or experience or money management, okay? They're quite different ideas there. And you'll be listening out to see which of these she attributes her success to. Okay, so imagining what the conversation is going to be like. Obviously, you can't imagine anything more than 2 people talking about this sort of thing, but if you get yourself into context, that might help you. Okay, now we're moving on to the last part, listening part 4, where you're hearing different speakers. You hear 5 different speakers. The text will have a thematic link, so the text will be about the same subject. You hear the whole series of text once, and then you hear the whole series again, okay? You will be listening for gist, generally. You won't be listening for particular details here. You'll be listening for gist. So when you listen for gist, you're listening for a general impression. You're listening for a general idea. Okay, here we're talking about a long-distance cycling event. And look at task 1. Choose from the list the reason each speaker gives for taking part in the event. Okay, and this will be, the reason for taking part will be expressed in a very general way. It's not now listening for specific detail. It's for listening for gist and sort of a general impression. All right, so there we have listening. There's no surprises there. There's quite a straightforward text. And the good thing about the listening is it actually reflects a lot of the sort of listenings you have to do in real life. So, hopefully you won't find this part too difficult. Summing up, you use time to prepare and check your answers. You underline key words. You write your answers on the question sheet during the test. Here you're very lucky because you have 5 minutes at the end to fill in the answers. Be careful to put the right answer in the right place. And don't leave any questions out. Again, very importantly, don't get stuck on a particular question. The thing, if you get stuck on a particular question, it means if you start panicking and wondering, I don't know the answer to this, I haven't found it, you might miss the following question. So if you really can't think of the answer, just put it behind you and move on. Remember, you've always got the second around to get the answer to this. And in the worst case, if you don't have the answer, if you haven't been able to get the answer, then you can guess. And if you can't guess and you leave it empty, well, it's only one question. Now, nothing will depend on one tiny little thing in the advanced. It's a very rigorous, full examination, and little things it won't be the fault of a little tiny thing that will make you perform badly. Okay, now we're going to get on to what I think is a very interesting part of the test, and which is the speaking. Okay, now you may think it's silly, but if you're doing a speaking exam, the first thing you need to remember is that you have to speak, and you have to speak as much as you can. Just so that you know, and I'm sure you already do know this, there are two examiners. One is the interlocutor, that's the examiner that you'll be talking to, and another one is an assessor. The interlocutor is the examiner, and this person will pass you the materials and interact with you, and the assessor will just say hello and goodbye and be sitting there in the corner listening to you. Again, like I said about the listening, it's kind of important to relax and to have a positive attitude to this part of the exam, to the speaking paper. The examiners are not trying to find your mistakes. They're there to find out what your spoken English is like, and they want to give you every opportunity to do so. The examiner knows you're nervous, and he or she will be doing his or her best to make you feel comfortable. So don't worry, try and relax, and try and sort of imagine that the conversation you're having is with a friend or with someone you know. Important. Remember that you're being judged on your individual merits, even though you'll be interacting with your partner during the exam. It doesn't matter if your partner is very good or very bad. It doesn't matter. Try not to get distracted by worrying about this, and don't even think about it. The examiners are trained to evaluate you individually, okay? So relax about that. Sometimes during the exam, as you can see, during the speaking paper, you'll be speaking on your own. We'll look at that now. And sometimes with your partner and with the examiner, just as you do in your own language. Okay? So try and think of this as a conversation with a person that you just met. I want to look now at the level, Common European Framework, level C1 here, just so that you can get an idea of what level the examiners are looking for. This is taken from the Common European Framework document, so this is completely reliable information. You should be able to express yourself fluently and spontaneously without much obvious searching for expressions. This doesn't mean that sometimes you can't go, we do this in our own language. That's not the problem. But you will be producing fluent language. So if you have level C1, you'll be doing this naturally. Well, just do it. Don't feel you have to hold back. And don't think that if you don't speak, that means you won't make any mistakes, so that will be good. No. You have to speak as much as you absolutely can. So let's have a look at the second point. I can use language flexibly and effectively for social and professional purposes. Okay? I can formulate ideas and opinions with precision and relate my contribution skillfully to those of other speakers. So this contemplates your ability to talk to another person, to interact with your partner and with the examiner. Okay? Now we'll look at spoken production, which refers to the part where in the exam, in the speaking paper, which is part 2, I think, we'll look at it now, where you're required to speak on your own. So here the description is, you can present clear, detailed descriptions of complex subjects, integrating sub-themes, developing particular points. Okay, this also contemplates the last part, where you enter into a discussion. We're going to look at it now individually. There's 4 parts individually. The examiner will take you through the parts, okay? The first part is designed to help you relax and for you to get used to the examiner's voice. So it's just a sort of little interaction, little exchange of information. He or she will ask you questions about yourself, so engage with that interaction. Don't answer in monosyllables. And here's an example of the questions that you might be asked. And don't forget, if there's something you don't understand, don't hesitate to ask. Okay? What you shouldn't do either, whilst I'm saying that you should produce language and you should speak as much as you can, don't prepare an answer to where are you from, okay? Don't prepare it. Make it natural. Forget about what kind of questions they're going to ask you. And certainly don't prepare anything, or because it's very unnatural. When examiners can see, they can notice, it's always absolutely clear when a candidate has learned something off by heart, which doesn't mean you shouldn't practice. Of course you should practice, but learning something off by heart to produce in an exam is, I'm telling you, not a good idea. Okay? So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say there. It gives you, part one gives you an opportunity to show your ability to use social language and talk about yourself, your experiences, plans, etc., etc. And also, it's important to know that when your partner is being asked these fairly personal questions, it's good to look at your partner and to take an interest in what your partner's saying. Obviously, you're not required to speak, but listen to what your partner has to say. You don't talk to each other in this part. It's just a natural way to begin the interaction. It gives you time to sort of warm up and settle down before you have to do the more specific parts later on. Part two. Okay, here you have the photos. In this part, you're given an opportunity to speak for 1 minute without interruption. Each candidate has a different set of pictures and you're asked to comment on them. Prompts, the examiner will give you some prompts and invite you to compare photos and to express opinions and speculate as well about two pictures from a set of three. I hope you can see them. There you can see three situations. You can see situations of where people are learning, okay? And the examiner might say something like, I'd like you to compare two of the pictures and say how students might react to these different ways of learning and how effective these ways of learning might be, okay? In this case, you have quite a specific question. Don't waste time just describing the picture. So enter into, obviously, you will have to make some observations about what the pictures represent, but don't fall into the trap, as it were, which isn't a trap. It's probably not the right expression, but don't limit yourself to describing the pictures when you've been asked to sort of enter into those pictures and express how you think the students might react. Obviously, the context there are very different. So choose the two photos that you like the best, or two photos that you think contrast the most, or two pictures that you think maybe have a lot in common in principle, but maybe underneath it all they're quite different. It's an advanced question, this. How effective might these ways of learning be? So, you know, it's something you need to sort of enter into what you think about these things. If you find that you do go a bit of a blank and you can't think of anything to say, try and put yourself in that situation. You surely have been in one of these situations. I mean, even if it's only sitting out on the grass and having a story, but they are general enough for you to be able to engage with them. So just have a look at them, and if you do go a bit blank, imagine you are in that picture yourself, and that should stimulate some kind of reaction, okay? Practice between now and when you do the exam, speaking for a minute about something, speaking for a minute about two pictures, or speaking for a minute about anything. A minute is a short time, but when you have to speak on demand in a context like this, it can sometimes be a little demanding, okay? So it's something that's good to practice doing on your own and together with a friend or a colleague who can then help you find what to say. The problem, probably the most common problem with this part would be that candidates are tempted to describe as opposed to react to the question and to engage with the question and to give their opinion, which you should be able to give quite freely. No one is judging you on your opinion. No one. So your opinion, you can have the opinion you wish, within reason, obviously. The important thing is how you express it. And obviously, you see, if your opinion is authentic, you are going to be much better at explaining yourself than if your opinion is not authentic, okay? And what the question is asking you is your opinion, okay? So, you know, that's what you should give. So that's part 2. All right. Let's have a look now at part 3, which is a collaborative task. This is a nice task. This is something which is fairly realistic. It's the kind of thing that you probably talk about with friends, and if you work, then you know the importance of communication. In this particular case, have a look at it. Or if you're a student, then you know what it's like when you receive teaching in different ways. You can apply it, any of these, to a teaching situation, to a work situation, or even to something that's to do with your personal life. Maybe there is something which is relevant to your personal life. So think about that to activate your ideas. Again, as I say, this is a collaborative task. So the examiner will give you a question to discuss. All right. You have time to look at the question and the prompts. You're given 15 seconds, and that's quite enough to have a look. And then you're expected to speak to your colleague about this theme, about the different aspects of communication in this particular case. The examiner will then extend your discussion a little further and ask you to discuss, to decide which 2 are the best ways of communicating. Okay, it doesn't matter if you don't reach agreement, obviously. Even though that's the task that's given to you, whether you agree or not is really of no importance. But it's good to think a little bit before you do the exam. It's good to think a little bit about the language that you do use when you're discussing things with a partner. Try and interact as naturally as possible with your partner. Remember that he or she is going to be as nervous as you are. And when you're when you're speaking together, obviously you'll be using the language of discussion. Yes, that's true. I agree with that, but on the other hand, that's a good point. Well, I think that's not really true. Yes, except that, all that kind of thing. The sort of thing you would use, the sort of language that you would use when you're speaking with a friend about something like this. If you can't think of a word, don't worry, try and paraphrase it. But whatever you do, do not, please, use Spanish words to explain things. A word which is quite difficult to translate and quite difficult to express. A word like selectividad or oposiciones. Find ways of expressing that. It sounds very bad when you put in inadvertently and accidentally a Spanish word there. So at this level, at your level, you should be able to find a way of expressing it, whatever it is you wish to say. Don't worry about the examiner asking you to stop speaking. It's not because you said anything wrong. It's just because the examiner needs to move you on to the next part. Agreeing and disagreeing, make sure you do that politely. And also, when you're talking with your partner, as you would in your own language, invite your partner to say, what do you think? Do you agree with that? Or how does that sound? Or with language which will invite your partner. Again, try and interact in as natural a way as possible. You'll be assessed on your ability to use the language of negotiation and collaboration. As I say, I repeat, it doesn't matter if you don't reach a decision. There's no right or wrong answer at all to this task. And now we're going to move on to the discussion, which is probably the last part of the speaking. We haven't got long to go now, so this part of the speaking paper is the part which tries to elicit that more advanced language. And you should be prepared for this. So here you have a series of questions which will be related to the previous part, and which the idea of giving you these questions is to get you to speak using more complicated, let's say, language. It gives you the opportunity to express your opinion, to exchange information, to agree and disagree, okay, with the examiner. And the examiner will take the conversation along quite naturally, all right? So engage with this. If you believe something, say so. Or as you always have to, you don't just express an opinion without reasons for it. This is an advanced level, so you'll be expected to provide evidence of your opinion. So be ready to do that. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of this at all. If you have a strong opinion, then you just express it. Okay. Certain issues are treated with quite some depth. I mean, if you look at the last question, how important do you think it is for families to find time to communicate with each other? Everyone has an opinion on that sort of thing, I would think. So don't be afraid to express it. Okay. So this brings us to the end. And now what we're going to do, we have 5 minutes, not very long, I'm afraid. I'm going to move on to this slide, which includes my email. So if you have any questions about the webinar that we've just been listening to, you've just been listening to, I've been speaking, please let me know. But we've got 5 minutes, so we're going to enable the chat so that if you have any questions here, if you have any questions, you can write them on the chat, and I will answer them on the audio as I am now. Okay, so just going to enable the chat. So if you have any questions, I think you should be able to write them now. Any other questions, or if there's anything you'd like me to clarify, please write to me. I'd be very happy to hear from you, and quite happy to write back to you. So if you have any questions here, remember, you know, it's a good exam, it's a fair exam. It's someone has asked a question here, Marta. Please could you send me the recording? I missed the hour. I think we are going to make this webinar public, and we will be in touch with you with a link where you can find it. Okay, so don't worry about that, Marta. That will be made available to you. Okay. A question. Okay, Rosa Maria, you have a question. Perhaps we'll have time for you to write it down before the time's up. If not, don't worry. You can write on the writing. What happens if you write more than 260? No, you don't lose points. Let me tell you, Sergio, you won't have time to write more. You don't lose points for going over 260. Go over 20, 30 words, no problem. The only problem is it's a problem for you because, you know, you're writing too much and you don't have time to write too much, okay? But apart from that, no problem. Then part 3 of the speaking. Do you have to discuss all the topics? Yes, I mean, you're expected to cover the topics, but don't forget that those topics are there. Let's have a look at it. Those topics are there to sort of support your speaking. If you don't get round the topics, it doesn't matter. What those topics are there for is to hear you, two of you, you and your partner conversing, okay? So the objective is not to cover the topics. The objective, all the topics, the objective is to have a conversation. Okay, another one in part 8. I don't understand when they say that the question, sácame, wait a minute, in the sabe. Oh, I don't understand your question. Sácame, ordena. I'm sorry, write to me, please, Rosa Maria, write to me. Don't they say the question? Then I have, will you be given extra paper? Yes, you can have extra paper. Maria del Pilar, yes, you can have extra paper. Jose Herman Hernandez, could you send the slides by email? Recording of the conference, they will be available. I'm not quite sure whether it will be by email or whether it will be how it will be, but you'll be able to. Is it okay, Sergio asked, if we write a conclusion in a letter where they are start thinking about something? Yes, absolutely. That's perfectly fine. And now we have Maria del Pilar. Selene Concha, part 5 of the reading and use of English. The first question is usually about a general idea of the text. I do not get that question correct, even though I have all the other correct. Could you please give me advice? The only advice I can give you, Selene, is evidence. You need to get the evidence, and you need to find exactly where that answer is in that text. I can't think of anything else. Is there a minimum for each part to pass the exam? Oh no, these are mysteries of the University of Cambridge. I don't know. They have their ways of evaluating. Get on the web and look and see if what you're really answering, there's an answer to it. I don't think you'll find a minimum there, because it's not necessarily numerically out of 100 out of 10 or anything. Paula, no, you can't use corrector fluid in the writing or in any other place. Marta de la Torre has the exam this Saturday. Can you have this by tomorrow? We will do, I don't know. My technical colleagues I will make sure they do this as quickly as possible. Okay, Rosa Maria, write to me by email. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. And I think we need to stop now because the hour and a half is up. As I said to you before, I wish you the very best of luck. The most important part of this advice I'm giving you is keep calm. Okay? Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for listening. Bye.